Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Stack. Very nice to have you here. Today, we're going to be talking about navigating enterprise sales with Dan Butchko, who's the founder and CEO of Playcrafting. I'll bring him on in just a minute, but first, I just want to remind everybody that tomorrow we're going to be talking about the investor-founder relationship. Really, it's going to be a great session and a few little surprises in there too. But we're going to be speaking with a founder and the investor he's had for pretty much 10 years and two companies. So we'll be getting their best lessons, advice on what makes a strong and productive relationship there. Next week, all sorts of marketing tactical sessions. We're going to be talking about affiliate PR, everything you need to know there. We're going to be talking about PR with Greg Gallant, who is the CEO and founder of Muckrack. He's a great speaker, a lot of awesome advice. We're also going to be talking about branding. And so anyway, check it out. We have new stuff going up every day, and we'll be looking forward to seeing everyone there next week. But today is about enterprise sales, and we have with us Mr. Dan Butchko. Hi.
Hello. How's it going?
How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm pushing through the dumpster fire that is 2020.
Where do we find you this morning?
I have been hunkered down with my parents in Jersey, so it's been unfortunate to be away from New York for so long, but nice to spend some time with my family. And fortunately, my rejigging of their office and a bunch of their spaces here has gone over well enough that they are still allowing me to stay here. So that's nice.
We're kind of in a similar boat. I'm in North Carolina. And full disclosure to everyone, Dan and I are friends. We're very close friends. And I'm actually actively involved in Playcrafting and have been for a number of years. So I know a little bit about what's going on, but I still have a lot of questions. So Dan is either going to feel like this is a delightful conversation or an aggressive grilling of what's going on at the company. Dan, tell everyone about what Playcrafting is.
Sure. So Playcrafting is one of the largest networks of game developers in the world, and by far the largest in the New York City area. We build games for some of the world's largest brands, such as Verizon, Bose, the NFL, Schick, and a number of others. And all of that work with different brands and technology companies is through this network of game developers that we've been fostering, which originally started as a meetup group way back in 2009. So we really started on the ground floor in the community, building that meetup with game developers in the New York area, branching it outward. And then that ground up building eventually brought us to the level that we are now, working with our developers to build games for brands. And it's been an exciting ride.
One of the reasons I was excited for you to come and talk to everyone is you are not a salesperson by training.
No.
You might not consider yourself a natural salesperson. I would disagree. But tell us a little bit about what your background is and kind of the difference in the roles that you played when you started this versus the role that you play now.
Sure.
I'm founder and CEO both then and now, but the nature of that role.
Yeah. So my background originally is in social work. So I went to NYU and I studied social work and psychology. I was looking to become a social worker, working with at-risk populations, doing direct counseling and whatnot. But it became very clear to me in my senior year of college when I was doing my internship that I was not cut out for direct, in community, direct service work with folks. I just could not bring that home with me every day, which gave me a huge respect for folks that can do that, but I could not. But I still had that passion for empowering communities and lifting up communities. So I went into work with a great group called Help for Children, which raises money for child abuse prevention and treatment, but works directly with the hedge fund and alternative investment industries to raise money for that cause. So for the first 6 years out of school, I was running events and marketing initiatives and whatnot to build up their fundraising efforts from the hedge fund and alternative investments community. But I reached a point with that work where I said, this is a great cause, but it is not my number one passion. Video games have always been the thing for me that I've been the most passionate about since I was a kid. and I quit that job and I started a small graphic design company just to make ends meet for a couple of years. And I said, I'm not going to work full time again until I am working in video games. And so one of the things I did is I joined a bunch of meetup groups, and one of those meetup groups is the one that preceded Playcrafting. And when I first started out with Playcrafting, it was primarily focused on events, and our initial push was into education. So the core of the business at that point really was offering classes and courses for aspiring and active game developers to either become game developers or sharpen their skills and get better at what they're already doing. So in those early days, the first, I'd say, three or so years, my job was very much on the ground, community building, talking to developers, meeting developers, finding out about what their needs are, finding who could be great instructors and leaders of our community to teach other folks how to make games, and really building out that funnel for sales around courses and classes and how to get started in there. And so that was the beginning of it. And now my job has significantly changed. Education is still a part of what we do, but it is not the core of what we do. The core of what we do is these enterprise deals where we are building games directly for some of the world's top brands. And so, I like to say that because our start was as a meetup group and my start was in community building, that's still at the core of everything that we do. But we now have this sort of bottom-up community aspect as well as this top-down Fortune 100 to community level, and it's really fun to be at that place where we're sort of meeting in the middle.
You speaking in the present, I know, because I do want to backtrack in a minute to like your first deals and what those were like, but tell us right now, what is the enterprise offering for Playcrafting? I know it's somewhat custom, but how do you describe it?
Sure. So the core is we develop games, period. And so we build games for brands and technologies that are looking to use games to extend their brand, bring in new consumers, showcase new technologies and products that are beneficial to developers, exciting to players, and to do that in a way that is games first. So we help brands build games, and we build games for brands that are innately fun and engaging and immersive and educational, whatever the purpose of the game is at its core, without feeling like, a cash-in or some sort of just like product tie-in that isn't as authentic as it should be. So that's really the core of what we do. And then we sort of built that out into a variety of products like events such as game jams, which are really the most popular product that we offer, where we unite a bunch of developers from our network, source them, recruit them, and have them show the brands what is possible with games by just giving them sort of a hackathon setup. And
what is the price range or median price of these packages?
Sure. So game jams are about $50,000 to $100,000 and up, depending on the goal. And then we go from, so with products like that, we are really focused on building smaller format games, so demos or just short experiences that are launched in some capacity. And then that scales upward from there. And so we do full scale development where for months on end, we are just building one game for one partner and fully launching it. That goes into the 150,000 and up range. And then when we sort of scale upward from there, we also have built out full-on initiatives where hundreds or thousands of developers from around the country are building smaller projects and submitting them and getting selected and then working directly with a brand to fully build it out to launch. And that can range from $350,000 up.
Can you list 5 of your recent clients?
Sure. So Schick is a huge client of ours. They were actually our first deal and our most recent one.
Okay.
So Schick Hydro was the first one that we worked with. And then most recently, we built a game for Schick Extreme called Shave the Day, which also was really nice because it raises money for children's cancer research through a mobile game. So Schick is a big one. Verizon has been a huge partner of Playcrafting since 2018. We've built out multiple games for them through our community, and through them, we've also been working with the NFL. So the NFL is another one. Bose has been a huge enterprise partner of ours. And then another one would be Oculus, which actually is just starting as of yesterday. It's our first deal with them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you don't just like email the game development department at
right. There is none.
So where to even begin? You're probably trying to initiate contact with these companies on a really regular basis, finding decision makers. Like, what's kind of your step one of even getting to or identifying the right people in an organization to talk to?
So, for me, it's been all about personal connections. And so I go right to LinkedIn. Fortunately, we haven't even had to think about this kind of thing until recently, as you know, because most of our deals have come through via word of mouth, client referrals, or just multiple deals from the same company. So just naturally, we've built up this client base that has come through one after the other because of what we've already done, which has been hugely beneficial. And then since then, what we've done is really reached out to, okay, who is the developer relations person at a technology company, or who is the digital marketing manager doing like digital marketing oversight at a specific company. Deals have worked in sort of a couple of different ways. We work directly with the brands and the companies themselves, so direct client-facing work. And then in other cases, we work with their agencies or their PR firms to execute and build out their games. And in that case, there's sort of like one agency in between us and the client, but we've kind of navigated both. So
you named a few of the companies that you've worked with. Who did you work with at Schick? Like, just give us an example of this kind of array. Who did you work with in digital marketing? What company did you pursue the digital marketing connection? Can you just kind of tell us about these touch points and kind of how the conversations were different?
Sure.
In kind of getting to the deal.
Yeah, I think the best place to start is really the first deal, because that has sort of emerged completely on its own. We weren't even looking for it. It came right to us. And then that is where we sort of built from there. And so for that one, I was reached out to by the folks at Edelman, huge agency based in New York, for their client Schick Hydro. This was back in 2017. And funny enough, back then, because education was the core of what our business was built around, we would do a lot of sort of small promotional things with larger brands and partners where it was just sort of an exchange of quick services. There was no price tag associated with it. We were just sort of doing it because it helped us elevate ourselves a little bit before there were even any of these deals in place. And so I got an email from the folks at Edelman back in 2017. And I believe it was one of their experiential designers. So like the folks on the ground looking for how to actually build out something for the folks at Schick on behalf of Schick through Edelman. And they reached out and they said they had something coming up for a client and they were looking to do something. And that was, I think, on a particularly rough day for me and for the team, where we had done so much of this sort of small pro bono stuff. And I was sick of getting, emails where folks were asking us to do, small free work. They were just sort of all stacking up to a point where it was just unbearable. And so I just said, I said a flat response that said, no, sorry, we're not interested in doing any additional pro bono work right now. And their immediate response to my saying no was, whoa, wait a minute. Like, there's something that we need to do, we want to do, we think you're the right partner for it. And yes, like, there is budget for this. So I said, okay, now we can talk about this. And from there, for that particular deal, they had a very specific goal, but not a specific way in which they wanted to achieve that goal. And that goal was to celebrate independent game developers at the Game Awards back in 2017. And for those of you who don't know, the Game Awards are like the Oscars of video games. They happen every year. And so they didn't have like a very clear way in which they wanted to achieve that goal, but they knew that they needed to on behalf of Schick, who was sponsoring the awards that year. And so we took two things that have worked really well for us on the community level. One was just high level event production through our Play NYC convention. And the other is our Global Game Jam site. And so the Global Game Jam is this huge international game jam. A game jam is like a hackathon for games, where thousands of developers around the world are building games with the same theme. And our site has sort of taken on a life of its own. Mm-hmm. And so when we were presented with this problem from Edelman on behalf of Schick, I said, let's marry these two things. Let's take what's worked so well for building games and empowering the community with the Global Game Jam and putting together a really packageable, serviceable thing in service of a brand that Play NYC really sort of was taking on the production side. And so that was sort of like the first deal that came through.
Let's go. I want to actually step back for a minute, because you were talking about these mini projects. You were talking about this pro bono work, which eventually became too much and was not sustainable. Right. But looking back from where you sit today, where you only really do enterprise deals, you basically try to focus your free work more on the community. Right. And are you glad you did those? Would you do that again? Because I feel like that was almost that you could consider that a strategy, right? You got these relationships in place. You made it easy. Would you do it that way again?
I would, for sure. I think that the biggest lesson from that specific deal coming through was the power of saying no. That was the first time that I had definitively said no. And it honestly just came from an emotional place where that day I was particularly fried, and just the idea of doing any small, even the smallest bit of work for no compensation for the company was just too much to take, And so I would do it again, because we had to build up the credibility to that point. Especially having come from being just a meetup group, in the beginning. When folks think of meetup groups, sometimes they think of something that's less formal, because a meetup group can be 4 people sitting in a cafe on their laptops, which is also great. But then it can also be Playcrafting or New York Tech Meetup, where it is hundreds or thousands of people united under the same umbrella. And so taking that sort of community ground level piece and then integrating these larger companies and these logos in a way that was sort of giving us the credibility before then. In retrospect, it wasn't a strategy at the time. It was just very reactive. But if I went back and did it again proactively, I would definitely do a version of that again, for sure.
So it's interesting. It's almost like a freemium enterprise model over 10 years. Right. I mean, I know you didn't intend for it to be free for that long, and a lot of this was happenstance, but it's kind of a novel concept. And I do then have to ask, going back to these smaller deals, which I didn't quite expect this conversation to go back to pre-enterprise sales days, but how were you making contact with these companies with whom you had this kind of let's do this together. Oh, it helps both of us. Oh, I got email distribution, you get access. How were these relationships being formed? If we can just talk about that briefly.
Sure. So they were being formed in a couple of ways. So first of all, we have an advisory board, which is voluntary, and we would get different recommendations from the advisory board as to who we should reach out to. Honestly, though, I think the majority was just coming from folks that were on the community level, that were looking on behalf of those companies for ways to engage with the developers. And they would just Google something like New York game developers, and Playcrafting would come up in some capacity. So that, I think, was one of them. And then the other thing I'd lean into, which again is the core of everything that we do, it's the community itself. So our network of game developers, which everything is based around. So the more that we listen to them, the more that we learn about what technologies, what brands, what companies they want to be working with, because they're the ones that are actually executing on this work and are building these games. And so in those early days, it was solely coming from the community of developers and our advisory board.
Is your advisory board still helpful in sourcing enterprise leads?
Yeah, absolutely.
How does that work with you? I mean, how do you kind of incentivize that? How do you just ask and they're, willing to help?
Yeah, it's very much like passion based because we are such a community grounded company. And so we have regular meetings with them, and again, everything is very much through personal contacts and direct connections. And so if one of our advisory board members knows of a technology or a brand that is looking for something in particular or is trying to reach more developers, and it'll just send them our way and we'll see if there's a good fit.
Would you do in your next company, if you were doing enterprise sales again, would you have an advisory board?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I'd probably have an advisory board earlier too.
Oh, okay. And why? Like, what are kind of some of the main, because I think a lot of people wonder if they should put together an advisory board, and I don't think we've had anyone come on this program, to my knowledge, with the level of positive experience that you've had.
Yeah, I think, again, it all goes back to our start as a meetup group. Something that helped in those early days when I was trying to make sure we were making that pivot from being just a meetup group to an actual full-scale company, was identifying folks that were already connected to either inside of our developer network or adjacent to it that could add a lot of value or already adding a lot of value, and just elevating them to a place that gave them recognition for the contributions that they already were giving to us or others like us. And you'll find that a lot in the games industry specifically, because it is, gaming is not just an industry, it's a culture too. And so there's a lot of culture that comes into the way games are made, the way businesses are formed around games. We are both the creators and the consumers of games here at Playcrafting, and many companies are like that too. So that comes through with our advisory board as well. Okay,
I feel like it's just incumbent on me to point out here that you're talking about this as like there's something special about games, there's something special about gaming people, there's like this is art more than sales and product.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think a lot of the ways that you're talking about this are just like the same across anyone who has created something, is solving a problem, is trying to sell it. So, I mean, I think that like one takeaway here is making sure that you're always, regardless of what level of sale you're doing, because we all are doing that as founders, that you are very connected and passionate about the problem that you're solving, and that passion might be like what has taken you through these incredibly hard times, and that passion that eventually wore out, and you said, okay, now you have to pay. What was your hardest deal? What was your hardest deal? What's been
the hardest deal? Let's see. I'd say the hardest deal was the first one, because that was sort of like the uncharted, like wild west territory where we were presented with a problem and we came up with a solution. But how do we price this? What value, like what cost do we assign to it? How do we do that accurately? How do we do that in a way that is paying our developers appropriately, but is also contributing to the company? So that, I think, was the hardest by far, and each one has been a lesson learned since. And then there was another deal along the way where, I think I mentioned before how game jams are really the core of a lot of what we do, and it's how we build out a lot of these games for different brands. There was one deal that came through where we were executing on it, and it was a game jam that was meant to ultimately or potentially result in a game that was getting fully released on multiple platforms. Mm-hmm. But the trajectory of how that was going to go and where it was going to go was not clear up front. And so when we were halfway through and the developers were already set and like the project was set, it became very difficult to execute on it, because the vision for the end game of the game was not clear from the start. And so that was particularly hard as well. But again, I'd say each one of these, now that I think there's been 15 or so of them, each one of them has been a lesson learned. And so it tells me that even when there's been deals that have been hard in the past 6 months, nothing's nearly as hard as the Wild West territory that was that very first one in 2017. Even though the brand partner was great, it was Schick Hydro. They were wonderful. They came back, and we've done something for Schick Extreme. But again, because it was the first one of its kind and something we had never done before, there was no structure. We had to kind of build the plane mid-flight with it.
So you've named very different companies, and I want to talk about Verizon now, a very different company from Schick, a very different company from Edelman. Mm-hmm. How did you get to the right person at Verizon? How did that relationship begin? And just where I'm going with this is I wanted to hear about the beginning of relationships, and I do want to go through the steps of your typical sales cycle.
Sure. So again, this ties back once more to our game developer community. So I mentioned Global Game Jam is a big free community event that we do where we just unite as many developers as we can to make games under one specific theme that Global Game Jam dictates. And so in early 2018, we had one of the winning teams from Global Game Jam made this really cool game in just 48 hours and was, I think, second place or third place that year. A deal had come through for Facebook 2 months later, and we had to find the right developers for that task. And at that point, it was building out games for Facebook's instant messenger or instant games platform. And so I had remembered that one of the top games from Global Game Jam had a really great set of developers on it. So I went back to that team. They came in and they were one of the teams that built out a game for the Facebook deal. And it just so happened that one of the members of that team is on the team at the Verizon 5G lab in New York. And so she had now experienced Playcrafting as a community and coming in to the Global Game Jam, and then Playcrafting as a business when she came in and did sort of this side project with Facebook as an independent developer, and said, wait a minute, there's something here. We at Verizon need game developers to be showing us what's possible with 5G for gaming. So she brought it back to Verizon, and that was the beginning of what has now been 3 deals with Verizon and a great ongoing relationship. But that would not have been possible if we did not have that free on the ground community game jam, which is Global Game Jam, which she came through in the very first place. There was no sort of Rolodex of people at Verizon that we were hitting up over and over again, trying to get a response or trying to get some engagement. It was completely natural, community level, free event. That's how the introduction came through.
What was the time between her kind of making this connection with her and saying oh, there might be something cool here? She is interested, you're interested. What was the timeline between that conversation where that connection was made and actually closing a deal with Verizon?
4 months.
4 months. And what was that pathway like? Was she the one who signed the deal, or did someone else?
She wasn't the one that signed the deal, but she initiated the process and basically worked with me to build out a roadmap that she then had signed off by her boss and by the head of the 5G lab.
And the head of the 5G lab. Okay.
Yeah.
And all right. So in this sales process, where whether it begins with someone from the community or it begins with an advisory board, and we should talk about cold outreach and what you've been trying. Mm-hmm. What kind of happens in between? Are there certain meetings? Are there certain steps that you kind of recognize as a founder and team?
Yeah.
Funnel, so to speak.
Now, the first thing I'll say is I wish that they all were the same, because it would make my job significantly easier, but they definitely are not. But there are a couple of common threads across all of them. We have the first conversation or two, and we identify what the need is and what the problem is. And from there, everything goes back to a roadmap. So the roadmap is our vision for how we are going to execute on building out games or this initiative or multiple initiatives for this client. The roadmap is sort of a work in progress document that starts out very rough and loose and sort of vague and becomes ultimately a scope of work that is attached to the actual deal and the contract itself. Now, the faster development of that roadmap and the quicker deals where we go from like first conversation to the start of the project or the deal getting signed, that happens when a client or a potential client comes in and has a very specific idea about what they want to do, what their budget is. Like that can make the process be, I'd say, a month from conversation to deal signing. But that is very often not the case because we're working with a lot of non-endemic brands that have not done anything with games before and are looking to sort of forge new territory here. And so that when it's a non-endemic brand and they come to us with sort of loose parameters and a loose idea and just a general problem, those deals can be 4 or 5 months from the first conversation to the actual deal getting signed.
Okay. And about how much time do you invest in each of these deals personally? How many hours?
Significantly less than I used to, fortunately. From in the beginning, it was very much like every individual roadmap proposal was like customized, like built from scratch. There was no templates. I could spend something like 40 hours, let's say, on a roadmap that would get ultimately signed off on. Now, fortunately, we've done enough of these that there's more of a process and there's more of a structure in place for it. And I have a team, fortunately, now, unlike back then in 2017. So personally, I'm not spending 40 hours on a roadmap unless it's for a deal that is $350K plus and or something that is so new and so big and so different that there frankly is not a more structured template to follow in some way.
Let's talk about cold outreach. I know recently you've begun to put more effort into initiating sales, we'll say from the outside of personal relationships. How is that going? What are you trying? Are you seeing any traction anywhere?
Yeah, the first place that we went to was email outreach. And as everybody knows, you can use any number of tools to source emails and contacts and leads. So we were doing that, and we went for the volume game first, and we put together a couple of email templates and sent them out in waves to a number of leads that we were sourcing from a couple of different places. And they yielded a couple of responses. And when I say a couple, I mean let's say 2% response rate on them. But what I found was that it was kind of going from point A, which was all of this completely organic inbound, these inbound organic deals that have been coming through, to 100% cold outreach. And there was a middle zone that we were not exploring yet. And that's what we've been doing recently. And that's been significantly more successful. And it's been through LinkedIn, directly reaching out with personal messages through my account. So either it's me or someone on my team that's directly reaching out. And that response rate is significantly higher and has been a lot more successful. Another thing that we've been doing recently that we were not, and so I look back in retrospect and I'm like, oh, how much did we miss out on 3 years ago if we had been doing this earlier? We weren't leaning in enough to the deals that we already had and the contacts that we already worked with. So there was not a formal sort of setup for collecting feedback from happy clients or engaging with clients on a regular basis that we already did something with. It was, in the early days, it was a little bit, okay, great, we made this happen, it worked, everybody's happy, and then we moved on. We weren't continuing to engage with clients that we had already worked with. Now we're doing that a lot more. I have regular personal calls set up, I'd say once a month with our previous clients, so that we're continuing the conversation with them. We also started an email list because I realized that while we're communicating all the time via email about broader playcrafting initiatives and whatnot, there was nothing on the B2B side that we were focused on where we were directly speaking to our previous clients and potential clients for this part of the business. And so we started an email list and just started putting out news on there for what we've noticed in the industry, what brands are doing, and saying what we're doing with and for brands in a more structured way. And so these things in recent months have been significantly more successful than just the straight up volume game of like tons of cold email outreach. We're kind of like finding that middle ground between piping hot inbound and like stone cold outbound, you know?
That's a really great point. And I really appreciate you bringing it up. The B2B communications, the communications you're having with the kind of previous or existing clients previous deals that have wrapped up. When you have these like monthly or every few months conversations, how do you kind of initiate them? I'm sure you have a relationship with them, but still you're not, you've got to bring something to the table. Are you like going to try to sell them on something, or are you just keeping in touch and shooting? I mean, what do these conversations sound like?
Yeah, in the early days, there was a little bit more, like, frankly, desperation to it, where I was like thinking to myself, oh, we need to keep engaged with them. And I would kind of stretch and try to find a way, like, what is something relevant to talk about? Mm-hmm. And that it didn't feel authentic, and it was not a great way to continue the relationship and keep it like ongoing. Mm-hmm. Now it's been more a continuous exploratory relationship where the first thing I'm doing is asking questions. And it's true. Like, again, if we already worked with someone like Verizon or Schick, we want to work with not just them again, but folks like them. And so I want to know what they're working on, what they're looking to do, what kind of bottlenecks they're hitting. And so I now structure those ongoing calls with a lot more questions than I had in the beginning. In the beginning, it was, hey, look what we just did. And it was very sort of self-promotional rather than research, because even though we already worked with them before and they know the quality of our work and they're happy with the results, the way to stay in touch and the way to make sure that we're on top of, like, at the top of their minds for continued business is not to just brag over and over again about other things we're doing with other brands, but to find out from them what their bottlenecks are, what they're looking for, and then also bring to them what we're finding and what we're seeing through the other deals that we are doing. And obviously there's some proprietary information that we can't share between clients, of course, but there's certainly lessons learned that we can apply to other clients that are not them. And so taking that sort of research angle, that ongoing research angle, has been a huge benefit. And it's been helpful because as we've been building out these new channels for engagement, like this B2B newsletter, I didn't want to sit here with our team and say, all right, what do we think our potential clients want? No, I went to 4 previous clients and I said, we're going to start this thing. We want it to be helpful to you. What do you want to see out of it? And so their direct input shaped it as well. And so as we're doing anything like that, I want to hear from folks that we've already worked with to help shape ongoing initiatives and new ones coming up.
Okay. Think about, like, in the past 6 months, I know we think of the past 6 months in a very specific way, but looking back to the past 6 months, think about a lead or a potential client you've engaged with substantially, let's say, who is not a past, who is brand new. Mm-hmm. How is that conversation going? What are you talking about? Who is what is the role that they play? What kind of, or like, tell us about how that brand new conversation is going.
Sure. So one of them we actually have a deal with, and we're doing a big initiative with in October, where we will be building out games. That conversation started back in February. So before the pandemic had sort of shut everything down. And obviously in the beginning, it was a different kind of conversation. But their goals have stayed the same all throughout. And so in the first 2 months of the pandemic, so between March and May, that conversation turned into a roadmap, which turned into a structured proposal. Because of so much uncertainty being there in the world, it just kind of was sitting there because budgets were understandably so up in the air. Mm-hmm. And so our contact over there, our contacts have been on the marketing side, because this is a brand looking for the substance of the game to be showing off their technology. They're obviously looking for developers, but they're the kind of brand that doesn't have like a developer relations team of any kind. So it's straight up marketing folks that we work with. So yeah, that conversation has been, it was a little bit stalled in the middle, but we'd already done the work and put together the roadmap, and we're just sort of waiting for the yes or no. And then while the world was sort of in calamity, just making sure that we're sort of having one weekly regular checkup to see how things are going, if there's any updates. And honestly, like, we've all gotten tons of ping emails that have no substance to them whatsoever. There's been such an opportunity here with the pandemic where everyone is a little bit more human than they used to be. And so frankly, my communications and our team's communications have been a lot friendlier and a lot more personal than they ever had been before, because we are kind of all in this together, and we genuinely are like asking, how are you doing? Hope you've got some time outside in the past couple of weeks. Like, I sent 5 emails like that yesterday. And it's helped, because even if business is not going to come through right now, because so much is in flux with the state of the world and the economy, people remember that personal connection, and people remember folks that sort of are there and checking in with you throughout. Yeah. And another thing I'll say too is there was another lead that came through, and this was a straight up gaming company that does have a full-on developer relations team. We've been working with their developer relations lead, and that conversation has been ongoing. There's been a proposal that's been sitting there for a little while, but they've made other announcements about other things that they're doing since. And so one great piece of advice that I got from our advisory board a year or so back was, rather than pinging someone saying, hey, what's up, or something that has no substance to it, everybody likes to be congratulated on accomplishments that they have, even outside of something that is related to you. And so that's been one great way that we have kept engaged with contacts that we've made in these past 6 months, celebrating things that we've seen on LinkedIn, or we've seen in the news, or we've seen in different press releases and whatnot. People respond really well to that. It feels good to get a congratulations from someone without asking for anything in return. And so that's been a really successful form of communication across the board too.
So I'm gonna like kind of, that's such a nice sentiment, and I know it's sincere. But I have to ask, like, can you operationalize that? I mean, you have a lot of relationships going on right now. You have a lot of sales pressures on you. You're trying to run a process. Like, how do you keep up with people and send them these sincere emails? How do you know what's going on? Do you have a list and you ping it every day, or do you have Google alerts? Like, how does it work for you?
It's definitely a short list. I'm not doing this with like 3,000 people every day, because that would take so much time. But I will say that, I have a genuine passion for video games. I love video games. I love the people that make video games. I love how video games have the opportunity and are changing the world. So when I'm sending a congratulatory message, I'm not just thinking, how can I stay top of mind for this lead? I'm genuinely excited about what they're working on. And we're still, we've signed a number of deals. We've had a lot of success on the enterprise side so far, but we are still early in the process, and we are still building out more of a structure around it. And so passion goes a really, really long way. And it only takes 20 seconds, 30 seconds to do a very quick congratulatory note to someone that is genuine. And being genuine does not mean like a 4-paragraph soliloquy praising them and bowing down to them. It's just a quick note, and they have responded really well to it. Now, operationalizing that, I very much invest in people. And so our staff and our team, when they have identified things that they've gotten excited about and that they've seen, I've encouraged them to also reach out and congratulate the team and congratulate the lead over there. That kind of thing is scalable, and hiring the right team when you're at that point that shares that kind of passion for your industry, your medium, your community, whatever it is, your business model, your process, whatever it is, that goes a long way as well.
Yeah, I'm reminded, I don't know why, but this one of the speakers we really love having on, Mallory Blair, she's the founder of a company called Small Girls PR in New York, an agency. And she actually, they require of everyone who works there, like at least once a week, reaching out to a reporter without an ask, just to catch up, to bring them, that everyone has to bring something to a reporter just to operate, just to kind of like institutionalize, giving before you get, thinking of others, and not being constantly in a like transactional mindset.
Right.
It sounds harsh and cold and prescriptive, but it's hard otherwise to like fit that in if you don't kind of give it its own box.
Yeah, and I'll say that, I mentioned before how cold outreach so far for us has not been giving us very much in the way of direct results. When we've kind of taken that mode and like gone a little bit warmer with it, we've noticed that not just taking a template and then putting it across the board to as many people as possible, that has not been successful at all. What has been successful is a shorter message that is genuine and direct and personal. So for us, like putting together and spending a minute on a genuine short email to a lead that we're actually excited about and we know our developers are excited about, even if it doesn't get a response, it feels a lot better and it's a lot more inspiring, and it helps us sort of keep going through in a way that is much more powerful and impactful just for team morale, especially in a time like this when sales is so difficult with so much influx in the world. It just goes a long way, and that sort of energy expenditure feels a lot better to do it that way, especially in this moment right now. Okay,
I think that's a great point. And so I think it bears mentioning, Dan, that Playcrafting is not a venture-backed business.
Mm-hmm.
You run profitably, and you're running it personally, and like the whole team is kind of, it's a personal project, it feels like, in a way, and you all kind of make the decisions and go with them, and I think there's a certain beauty to that, and I think that that's a strength, as you just identified. But why not raise $500,000 or $1 million and put it towards, you can't reach out personally to 3,000 people a day, but if you hired a few more people, you could. So why not do that? Why not something now? Can you amp it up? Can you start playing a volume game? Is that anywhere in the cards?
It's more in the cards now than it was before, but the way that we're structured allows us to pivot very quickly. So, a lot of companies, as we've all seen in the past 6 months with the pandemic setting in, the bigger they are and the more investors they have, the more decision makers there are in the process, and the harder it is to make a sharp turn when needed. Now, we're not making a sharp turn away from games in any capacity, but we are working with a lot of different kinds of companies and different kinds of brands. And so removing sort of the control, like the removal of control that comes along with involving a lot more investors, is something that I have not wanted at all. Obviously, it kind of gives a little bit more financial stability and a little bit of a longer runway there. But had we had that sort of early on, we would have probably lost the scrappiness that frankly produced these enterprise deals in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so that's really why I have sort of shied away from it, and instead have gotten smarter about how we're getting deals, how much time we're spending on sourcing them and converting them, how we're pricing them appropriately. I talked about how we did pro bono stuff early on. Even those first few deals were grossly underpriced. Now, would I go back and change the price? Probably not, because we were forging new territory. But now it's kind of, we're taking these deals and we're kicking it into the company and the community at the same time, of course. And then we're using that as a way to then reinvest and hire out some more folks. So it's a longer game than, bringing in rounds of funding and multiple investors and whatnot. But it's a game that is a little bit more authentic to who we are as this meetup group that started 11 years ago.
Over the next year, do you expect your packages and deals to become more uniform, or do you think that they'll stay just as custom and to the degree that they are dissimilar as they are now?
They've already become more uniform, so I think they'll get a little bit more uniform in the next year or so. The good thing is that we've done so many of a couple of our different products that they are a lot more easily replicable than they were even 6 months ago. So the fact that they have become more uniform and they will become more uniform has sort of allowed us to have this sort of level of stability around certain kinds of deals. The customization comes in in a way that, like, how can we add on to it in different ways? And so we'll take our Game Jam product as an example. The Game Jam at its core works the same for all of our different brand partners, but we've added on other products and services to customize it for different partners. And one thing that's emerged in light of the world being even more virtual than it was before is how streaming is such a big priority for brands of all different kinds now. And so finding ways to bring the process of the games being made as well as the launch of the games onto streaming platforms has been one additional service that we've started adding on and has had great impact and great success for our different deals. And so those core offerings will likely stay the same, but what we add on to them will certainly change. And the amount of time that we spend building them out from the start, because they have already sort of formalized a little bit, it will continue to shorten a little bit too.
Okay. And the people that you're selling to at organizations, are they starting to look more alike in terms of title and role, or are you still finding it to be kind of all over the map?
It's all over the map still. Again, because we work with a lot of different kinds of companies, and we also work with agencies that are representing different companies and brands. It's the sources are coming from all over the place. There are a couple of different roles that are sort of similar across multiple types of clients and types of leads that are coming through. Like I mentioned, folks on the digital marketing side, developer relations is a big one for a technology company looking to work with developers directly. So there are some commonalities, but they've come in through so many different ways that it would be wrong for me to say that I think that it's going to be hyper formalized to the point that I'm going to have somebody on my team only reach out to these 3 kinds of roles at these 2 kinds of companies, let's say, in the next 6 months.
Sure. How do you reach those people? You've started an email list. You've started an email newsletter. I'm curious how that's going. Or, if you feel it's kind of directionally going okay. And then I'm curious about PR and marketing and how you're kind of using those to bolster the sales.
Yeah. So the email list it's a funny one. It's our B2B email list is very new. I think there's 300 or 500 people on it, whereas we have over 30,000 on our regular list, and that's been regularly, used, and we've been communicating with people for a decade now through that. But the B2B one, while smaller, is so specific in who we put on there and how we're talking to them that, we just sent out our 4th one yesterday, and one of our upcoming clients responded and said, "Congratulations, we're so excited about X, Y, and Z coming up." That wasn't even related to what we're going to be doing with them. And so that alone makes it worth it. to me, and it's stuff that we are already talking about internally and externally, but we just never were concentrating it and bragging about it the way that we should have, you know. So that I see as continuing to grow over time. The PR side of things has been really exciting and interesting because at our heart, again, because we are a company built around a developer network and a community, we already are building sort of developer stories into what we're doing. And so finding ways to identify who the developers are, why they're building what they're doing, and what the inspiration is behind the games that are being built for these different brands and partners has been a very strong way to engage with press, because it combines both a business interest and a human interest to it. And so we've had press come through for our enterprise deals that are both on the like ad and marketing side, like Ad Week, and then also on sort of the entertainment side, like the Hollywood Reporter and Screen Rant, and then on social change, the social change side, and with outlets and whatnot that are covering, you know, developers of color or developers from different backgrounds and whatnot, and how they're sort of integrating their stories into these games. And so PR has been a very important aspect of it. It has not been immediate in its return, but even now, you know, last week I got an email from the CEO of a huge tech company on the gaming side that had seen a press release through PR Newswire that we had for our partnership with Bose a year and a half ago. So that's the kind of thing that it just feels it's good to get the right story out there, get it out there, and then have it sit there because it can collect over time. So the newsletter is a big way. The PR side is a big way, another way. And then, as you know, as a community, we've done events for the longest time, and we've used events as a great way to build our community of developers and fans and gamers. But we have not really used events to spotlight the B2B side or build relationships in that way. And so, and I've done hundreds of events in the past 10 years of my career. So it's so easy to throw an event together. So why don't we start doing that around our B2B offerings? And so we'll start doing that as well. And it's one of those things that's like when you pull your head up and you can see the forest for the trees, these opportunities and these different channels for engagement and communication become a lot clearer, but you just have to have the right business partners and staff so that you are not falling into the weeds too much. And if it is you on your own, then that's where meditation, writing, and all that kind of stuff can come into play, because you just need to be able to pull yourself out of sending emails and go back to the bigger picture as much as you possibly can.
This is great. Thank you so much for taking us through this. And it's been as involved in as you and I have been in as many discussions as we've had about this business. I've still learned so much more on this call. Well, everybody, we'll see you tomorrow to talk about investor-founder relationships. It's going to be an awesome conversation. And Dan, thank you, and take care, and I can't wait to see you on the other side.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.